Hi, everyone. It's been a pleasure to meet all of you. So I'm Joonas. I work at DigitalOcean. We're a small cloud for developers. You may have heard of us, hopefully. So I submitted a lightning talk that was something along the lines of, when is Kubernetes not the solution? I realized, as I've been talking to a lot of people here, that all the problems that I'm talking about were probably being already solved. There's a lot of smart folks here. I figured that that may not be the interesting thing to talk about, actually. So if you were hoping for that talk, I apologize. I'm not going to say any bad things about that. Instead, what talking to all of you, or many of you here, made me realize is that we have another problem that is actually not solved by technology, mostly, that I would rather focus on. So I called it crossing the chasm with Kubernetes. So what is the problem? So if you look around, a lot of you folks are really advanced. We're at the bleeding edge here. This is the bleeding edge of this technology. All of the core contributors and people who make the magic happen for Kubernetes are here. And many of you are the expert users who are already successful with Kubernetes in production. However, what's missing is all the folks who are not already using Kubernetes, and there's a variety of different reasons for that. One of the things, I was talking to one of my former colleagues, Brian Lyles, here, and one of the things he mentioned is like, a lot of the content here is very expert, advanced. It's not really something that's targeted for intermediate, somebody who's maybe in the beginning of their career of getting into Kubernetes. And so what I thought to myself is like, well, why don't we talk about that? We have someone in the community, Kelsey Hightower. He's going around doing a fantastic job talking about this problem and addressing it, but he's just one guy. So I like to draw a parallel of the problem we have to something that I'm familiar with in the Go community. So in the Go community, you have the tour of Go. That's how people get started with Go. They go through that, and then next thing you know, there's another gopher tells them, well, you should go read the language spec. If anyone is a gopher here, you're probably familiar with that problem. There's a pretty big gap between going through the tour of Go and reading the language spec. It's kind of jarring. Another one that I've sort of more recently been familiar with is Prometheus. So when you start using Prometheus, maybe you get familiar with what's a metric. And then next thing you know, you have to understand quantiles, and you have to understand all this complicated statistics to make it do the job that you need it to do. And so I believe we sort of have this similar problem in the Kubernetes community. We have a lot of content that's geared towards the advanced users, people who really understand what they're doing with this, including the talks that are being given here. And that's great, but we're all pretty advanced. There are a lot of people on the other end who are just getting started trying to figure out how do they make this thing work for them. Maybe they've run kube up, they have a cluster, and they're like, well, what do I do now, right? And can I take this cluster to production, or what should I do? And I would argue there's not a lot of content right now that's addressing that problem. So I really want us to come together as a community and start talking about how do we bridge the gap from somebody being a novice to actually becoming an expert. I know that's not as exciting as talking about all these advanced technologies and doing things like stateful sets. But I think that's crucial if we want to really take this community to the next level. So some of the things that I've thought about myself is like, what can we do about this? Some of the things we can do, and this is based on the work that we've done at DigitalOcean, we can sort of approach this from two angles. So from the bottom up, we can start writing talks and tutorials and really walk through people through the different concepts and with different types of content. And I think an example of this is like the Udacity course that Kelsey Hightower did. I would argue there's probably more content geared towards actually people using Kubernetes as opposed to operating Kubernetes. And I think that's still an area that we could do a lot better job in. And then the other approach we can take is actually come at this from the angle of building tools that actually help bridge the gap. So tools like OpenShift and Days may, for example, be good enough for people to get started, and they can slowly ease into the concepts of Kubernetes and how actually you run this stuff. But you still have the problem of you need to operate your clusters. So I'd like to get this conversation started around this, like what can we do to really bring the community together and take the community to the next level? Because frankly, what makes Kubernetes great is the community. And if we can get a more deep and diverse community, that's going to be better for us. So how can we go from 1,000 people this year to 2,000 people next year? I think that's the challenge that we really need to figure out. So sort of sorting out, getting past the hype when people read a Hacker News blog post about some companies switching to Kubernetes and having great success, to then being able to actually take that into production and be successful with it. So I'd like to urge the whole community to start thinking about this problem and come together and figure out ways where we can actually start giving people content that makes Kubernetes easier, more accessible to a larger crowd. So that's all I had. I apologize if you're here for the more technical talk. I think this is a more relevant problem for us to be solving now, since we have a lot of smart folks already solving the technology problems. So thank you.